All right, well, joining me on the line today is Christian Picciolini. A very interesting story. He is a published author, a book entitled Romantic Violence, Memoirs of an American Skinhead. He's also the co-founder of a group called Life After Hate. It's a nonprofit helping people disengage from hate and violent extremism. Christian, thank you so much for taking time to join me on Follow the Money Radio.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I recently heard you on NPR and also on CNN speaking out after some of the racial tensions and racial violence that we've seen in the streets of America. And I was so stunned by your story. And I would just ask if you would share with our audience where you come from. Of course, you wrote a book about Memoirs of an American Skinhead. You come from a very interesting background, and you came out of it. Would you share your story with us?
Absolutely. Like you said, in 2009, I co-founded an organization called Life After Hate to help people disengage from hate groups and hateful ideologies. And one of the reasons why I think I'm uniquely qualified to do that along with my colleagues is because I, 30 years ago, was a member of America's first neo-Nazi skinhead group. I spent 8 years in that movement from the time I was 14 years old in 1987 until I was 22 in 1995. And helped essentially architect what it is that we're seeing today, 30 years after I was first recruited. And make no mistake about it, let me just say this plain and simple. What we're calling the alt-right today, what we saw happen in Charlottesville, is unequivocally the same as what I was a part of 30 years ago. Violent, racist, hate, anti-Semitic, it's anti-immigrant, anti-black, and anti-anything else that isn't European white. So when I say that their mission is to create a white homeland, I'm not saying that they're going to pack their bags and find some cozy corner of the globe to feel comfortable amongst themselves. What they claim they want to do and what they have a mission to do is eliminate everybody else who's not like them to restore what they believe is their white glory. So this is a very dangerous situation that we're in. By no means was Charlottesville the first of its kind. Demonstrations have been happening just like that over the last 30 years. In fact, in my book, I dedicate a whole chapter that was a turning point for me at a rally that was almost identical to the one that happened in Charlottesville. This is something that we've been sweeping under the rug as a nation since our founding. We've built systems and infrastructures and institutions that are there to foster white supremacy, to keep people of color down. And while we've made progress over the decades, we haven't made enough. We still haven't lived up to the promise of what America can and should be.
You're listening to the voice of Christian Picciolini. He is the author of a book entitled Romantic Violence, Memoirs of an American Skinhead. 30 years ago, Christian was involved in the white supremacy movement. Today, he is speaking out against it with his group Life After Hate, a nonprofit helping people disengage from hate and violent extremism. Christian, there have been a lot of prognostications over the last couple of days regarding President Trump's response to the violence in Charlottesville, and many people on the left and many people on the right who do not have your background have been making all kinds of comments about it. And I'm sure you have some thoughts on that, but I'm curious, as you listen to Donald Trump's speech when he talked about there was violence on many sides, and also especially the interesting press conference that we saw and witnessed on Tuesday, just yesterday, what did you hear in that from your vantage point? What is happening, and what is your take on Trump's comments?
Well, I think like most Americans, I went to bed last night with a sick feeling in my stomach about waking up the next morning in a country where its president, the leader of the free world, was not simply just giving out dog whistles to white supremacists and violent neo-Nazis, who was using a bullhorn to essentially apologize to them for what happened. And make no mistake, there were definitely two sides at this rally. One side was a terrorist group who ended up murdering somebody, and the other side were proud Americans who were standing up for what they were and against something that is very un-American. So, when I hear Donald Trump say these things over and over and over again, they ring true to me because they were nearly identical to the things that we used to say 30 years ago, where we were against immigration, where we wanted to build a wall, where we wanted to expel people from our country that we felt didn't belong because their skin color was different than ours. Certainly with the appointees in the cabinet that the president had, I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that people like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller and Sebastian Gorka and his wife are very tied to this far-right, alt-right, neo-Nazi movement. It's been proven in the policies that they've tried to put forward, in the talk historically that they've given. There's record of it, and we have people in power right now influencing at a point, not just the United States, but the world. And let me be very clear about the cabinet appointments that have been made regarding Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon and Sebastian Gorka and even his wife Catherine, who's an intelligence advisor now. These people have a long-standing history of being connected to the violent far right. They've been very open about it in statements that they've made in the past. In fact, Bannon has created a platform for the alt-right, according to his own words, which is, a news site that's full of conspiracy theories. It's full of distorted facts and propaganda that work to diminish, American values and boost up this idea of this alt-right, far-right neo-Nazi movement that is currently starting to grow very rapidly in our country.
It's very interesting that you say those things because, again, your background makes you very uniquely qualified to speak to these things. Typically, that is considered political speech, and people would automatically accuse you of being a liberal or a Democrat or something along those lines. But in reality, you're speaking from a very interesting vantage point. Let's talk about the reality of this threat, Christian. You know the aims and the goals of the white supremacy movement here in America. You know what their aim is. We had a FBI and DHS memo that was dated May 10th that warned that white supremacist groups have already carried out more attacks than any other extremist group in America over the last 16 years. And according to the document, will likely continue to pose a threat of lethal violence over the next year. And so that was put out by our own government just 3 months ago. And here we have it coming true. How dangerous is this? Is this going to get worse in your mind before it gets better?
Well, organizations like Life After Hate and the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League for many, many years have been dedicated to tracking this type of violence and have been reporting and warning that this was a growing trend. And it fell on deaf ears mostly. While we were focused on terrorism coming from overseas, we are dealing with a domestic terrorism problem that's much, much larger within our own borders. There are reports that there are over 300,000 armed militiamen training in paramilitary fashion, preparing for a race war. It's a very volatile time in our country right now because there are two alternate realities happening. And the reality is that I've been on both of those. I've spent most of my life sitting in both of those camps and understanding them both very well. In fact, in the alt-right camp, or what we used to call the white supremacist camp, I was one of the people who helped build that, so I understand it very well. It's right and I'm in the middle, and I think most Americans are in the middle. I think, the loudest voices right now are the most extreme, the ones on the left and the ones on the right, when in reality, 98% of us are probably somewhere in the middle. So I think that we need to find that common ground that majority has and work out from there, rather than focusing on the differences that we have, debating over them, and then trying to find common ground. I think we need to find a place of commonality and help that grow and foster that so that we can come to an agreement on what it is that America stands for, what it is that we want from our country, expect from our country, and how we deliver that to people who've been marginalized for so long, since the very founding of our country, who continue to be marginalized by some of these systemic problems that we're facing that create this white supremacist environment where groups like the alt-right or the neo-Nazi movement can grow.
We're in our final moments with Christian Picciolini. He is an author and the co-founder of Life After Hate, a nonprofit helping people disengage from hate and violent extremism. As a former skinhead, he has very unique insights into what's happening right now. Our final question for you, Christian, as we take a look at the pulpits of America, the Christian church, the evangelical church here in America, we see, if we go back in time, if we go back pre-civil rights era, pre-Loving versus Virginia Supreme Court case, we find that the American evangelical did have quite a bit to say about race. They actually had a segregation doctrine. I mean, they used scriptures. In fact, you can even look in the Dake's Annotated Bible, one of the most popular study Bibles pre-1960, and you'll find that there are many verses that were used to create this doctrine of segregation. But since the 1960s, after the Civil Rights Act, after the Supreme Court case, we've really had a lot of mute pulpits. Many Christians are not speaking out on this, perhaps the way that they should. I'm curious, with your group, Life After Hate, if you are experiencing support from evangelical churches around the country, and if so, how? And if not, why do you think you're not?
That's a really great question, and I'm glad that you asked that. I think that faith communities are an important ingredient in helping people find the right path if they've been lost or completely avoiding it to begin with. People join extremist movements because they're searching not for ideology, but for community, identity, and purpose. And that makes faith communities one of the most important community groups that can help people connect with those things in positive ways rather than deviating off their intended path and essentially going off the road. I have not had any support, unfortunately, from evangelical organizations, though we've done a ton of work with mosques, with synagogues, and with other denominations as well. And you're right. I think that for the most part, evangelicals have been very silent on this issue. And I would encourage them to really dig deep into their souls. And if God is the one speaking to them, they need to listen to what the true meaning and the true path forward that God has given them. And that's to be kind to their fellow man and woman.
Powerful words from our guest today, Christian Picciolini. I encourage you to go pick up his book, Romantic Violence, Memoirs of an American Skinhead. Christian, thank you so much for what you're doing. In our final moments, you can share with our folks how they can find you online.
Sure. Thank you very much. You can find us online at www.lifeafterhate.org. We're currently running a fundraising campaign because in June, we had a $400,000 grant stripped from us by Donald Trump that was awarded to us under President Obama to further our organization and be able to scale at a time when the country is really facing a dire need for our services. In fact, we're the only organization in the Western Hemisphere that is helping to de-radicalize people in far-right extremist groups. So if your listeners feel compelled to either share that information and let folks know or donate, they can find a donate link on our page. We're currently trying to be able to scale to service more people because the influx has been, frankly, a little. Romantic Violence, Memoirs of an American Skinhead can be found in bookstores or on Amazon, anywhere that books are sold.
Fantastic, my friend. Thank you so much for your time.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.